Hey, Psych 100 students. I didn't think I'd be filming from my office anymore, but they gave us one day to come in and clean out our offices, which I'm glad because there was stuff I forgot after I tried to clean it out Thursday evening. So I'm glad they gave us that opportunity to come back. I did notice that the hand sanitizer mysteriously disappeared from our psych lab. 2 bottles of it. I'll say no more, but I may have to wear the mask. A couple things. For those who are going to be sending me papers very soon, and I don't know if you're going to be able to watch this by the time all the things are due, this Tuesday and Wednesday, depending on the class, I'm hoping that you'll try to send it via Word doc. Primarily through Word doc because I can grade it a lot easier. I can see it a lot easier. Doesn't mean the other ways don't work, but try to send it through Word doc. If not, send it any way you can. All right. Wanted to give you a latest announcement. Ink pen number 652. My wise owl died in grading and recording all your chapter notes and so forth. Okay, let's get to our chapter, and that would be chapter 8 on memory, the last chapter we're going to cover for exam 2. Now, you may guess that I really like this chapter because memory is what we're composed of. Think of this. If you have no memory right now of why you're watching The Strange Man on the video, why you're at home, what your name is, who the people around you are, do you really exist? I mean, as a person, as an entity, of course you exist. But without our memories, we sort of don't exist. Our identity is tied to our past memories. So it's pretty important. Here's a cartoon playing off the riff of memory. On the contrary, I can't recall a thing from 50 years ago, but I remember exactly what I had for lunch. That's interesting because usually it's the other way around, right? You can remember detailed information from the past. I can't remember what we had for lunch yesterday. And, now that you ask me, neither can I. How about this one? Stop serving them as soon as they start to bring up repressed childhood memories, right? So this notion that alcohol is going to free up their memory, and they start remembering all these interesting things that may or may not be true, depending on who you ask. So what are we talking about? We're talking about memory. I love this definition. The nervous system's capacity to acquire and retain skills and knowledge for later retrieval. Those are the 3 key words: acquire, retain, retrieve. Easier said than done. During a typical exam, there's a lot of stress, and the ability to retrieve is the issue, right? Memory is really made up of 3 components: encoding, putting labels on them; storage, sticking them in a drawer someplace, and then trying to find them, retrieval. That's the tricky part. Now, I'm not going to say who in the class, but a few people, after they left exam 1, I heard them say the following: blankety blank Pedrosa. Now, I try not to take that personally because I've been called worse. But what typically happens is you're taking the exam, typical exam in class, multiple choice, short answer essay, and there's just some things you can't remember. You studied, you just can't remember it. And then voila, when do you remember? When you're heading down the steps, when you're in the elevator, when you're in your car, later at Costco. That's frustrating. Computer systems are molded after our memory systems. Why? Because we designed them, right? We designed them. So you're trying to remember a number, you hit it on the keyboard, you put it in storage, you remember those floppy disks, and then you try to find out where was it, which disk, which folder, which file, etc., etc. Short-term memory lasts about 30 seconds. And that's very frustrating because you could just meet somebody briefly at a party and your friend comes up to you and says, "Who was that hottie you were just talking to?" And you're like, "I have no idea." But you just talked to them. They just told you their name. I know, but I got these holes in the side of my head. It goes in one ear and out the other. Voila. Now let's talk about this man right here. And you want to talk about a cool look. Check out those glasses. Definitely not on his ears at all. His name is Herman Ebbinghaus. And by the way, when Mr. Ebbinghaus went to the dentist had to say, "Sir, can you help us find your mouth because we can't quite find it in this vicinity." Herman Ebbinghaus was interested in memory, particularly in the field of forgetting. Why is it that we forget? How quickly do we forget information? It's amazing, the stuff. And this is why I ask you every chapter, what did you think of the chapter? What were your thoughts or feelings about it? Then I share mine. Because I know that some of you, if you're not really that into the chapter, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be something that's going to be harder to retrieve because the information is not of interest to you. So that's why I try to make it interesting, right? Ebbinghaus decided to give a bunch of words to his students, a bunch of nonsense syllables, and they had to memorize them. And then they put the list away, and then he waited. He waited some time. And as you can see by this data, the longer he waited, the less the retention. Immediate testing after they memorized the nonsense terms, 100%. You wait 20 minutes, you're down to a D, almost an F. And then beyond, you can see it dramatically decreases. So this theory says, hey, the longer we wait, the worse it is. Which means, essentially, if we really want to do a test of memory, we should test you after each lecture, right? Unfortunately, that would take up a lot of time. That would produce a lot of anxiety to be constantly testing. So we don't do it quite that way, although some professors do test weekly. And hopefully you do well. It's my belief that's why summer semesters and intersession do so well, because they are tested more frequently. You know, they're tested typically at the end of the week as opposed to at the end of the fourth week, right? So what do we do to challenge ourselves and remember things more carefully? Well, we use something called mnemonics, little memory techniques that can help you improve your memory. So, for example, for mathematics, use PEMDAS. Or perhaps you heard the following expression, "My dear Aunt Sally." In other words, these are little mnemonic devices so that you can make up a little story that'll help you remember the key items that you're trying to remember, whether they're the planets or whether they're the how to solve mathematical equations. Now, in the cartoons, in order to lose memory, you have to get bopped in the head. In order to get your memory back, you get bopped in the head again, which is absolutely ridiculous if you think about all the brain damage that we're talking about. But amnesia really does exist. You can get a blow to the head that can cause amnesia. And some people get psychological trauma that can also cause amnesia. So retrograde really interferes with your ability to retrieve memories that you had before the brain injury. And then anterograde amnesia has the damage is really with forming new memories. If you want to explore the world of memory, check out this case study online. If you just hit his name, Clive Waring, and watch the videos, you'll get a good sense of how memory can drastically change your life. In the cartoon, I mentioned this notion of false memories and this ability of remembering things that you're absolutely convinced is the truth, and it may have been altered. For example, if you were to write your earliest memory down, putting the age, what city you think it took place, and what you remember about the earliest memory, how certain that that earliest memory is true? And the reason I ask that is because have you ever looked through a photo album, perhaps heard stories from relatives? When you were this small, you used to do X, Y, and Z, and you're thinking, I don't remember that. But you hear the stories enough, it becomes a real memory, right? I had a student one time write down his earliest memory, and he remembers a visit to Tijuana to go visit his tia Juana, and he remembers riding in the car, getting car sick, stopping for burritos, visiting with family, coming back. He told that story in class, and then he went home and he checked with his family, and he was told, you didn't go on that trip. Your brother went on the trip. He stayed home. Now, why did he remember this visit to Tijuana, to go visit his tia Juana? Because he heard the stories, and he put himself in that car. Now, Elizabeth Loftus is one of the people that might argue that your memories are not set in stone. She did research primarily driven by the loss of her mother. As a teenager, she lost her mother, a very tragic occurrence, and years later, she was told by a relative that she found her mother deceased in the swimming pool. She had no memory of that whatsoever. But being a psychologist, she knows how memory can be tricky. And then the memory came flooding back. She remembered the details of the tragedy. Then she was told by another relative, never happened. Did not happen that way. You weren't even there. Your aunt found your mother. So she realized that memory can be very tricky, that sometimes we can manufacture memories that are not even real. So, how good is your memory? Well, it depends on probably the type of memory you have. For example, semantic memory deals with memory of all kinds of information you learned as a kid. Now, some of you memorized all the capitals of the states. And if I asked you what was the capital of Ohio, you might struggle. I gave you a hint. It starts with a C. Nope, not Cleveland, Columbus. Episodic memory is that memory of specific information that has personal meaning. For example, today's March 23rd. Wow, that rings a bell. It's my friend. What should I give them? Maybe a roll of toilet paper. That'd be a great gift. Implicit memory. Memory for information that's either not intentionally committed or is retrieved unintentionally. For example, suddenly remembering that today is your friend's birthday. Oh, I'm sorry, that was the second one. I meant it for implicit. Episodic memory is recalling when you went on your first date. Yikes. I think women are better at this. They can remember details. What you wore, what they wore, what you ordered for dinner. Fellas are like, was that you? All right. And then we get to explicit memory. Memory committed to and intentionally retrieved. For example, memorizing the definition of chunking. Chunking, which is in our chapter. What exactly is chunking? Well, it's a weird name, a weird term. Chunking is working memory to organize information into meaningful units. In other words, putting things into categories. That'll help you because sometimes you're overwhelmed. Like, gosh, we got all these terms to memorize. How come I put them into categories? So let me give you an example of chunking. This guy, who's feeling a little chunky these days, has a bunch of terms he has to memorize, and he's like overwhelmed. Like, there's too many. I can't do it. But then he realized if I chunk them, put them into categories, voila, it's not so hard after all, right? Now, how good is your memory? Well, I'm going to test you. I'm going to test you. I want you to take a minute and number your paper 1 through 6, or on your keyboard, wherever you're taking notes. Number your paper or your keyboard 1 through 6. Leave enough room for a 1 or 2 word answer. And I'm going to test your memory during our second video. So don't go away. Thank you for your attention.